housekeeping, I think.
Okay.
I had to turn on the recording. Do you want me to
Okay,
do
great.
the Zoom
Yes.
stuff now?
Sure.
Yeah,
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Thanks.
and do
Thank you,
that.
Kim.
Welcome committee members, liaison, and members of the public to the Legal Services Trust Fund Executive Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. We will begin shortly. We are using Zoom with a goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, please type "I have a comment" or "I have a question" in the chat, and a message will be sent to the host. Alternatively, you can use the raise hand feature. In efforts of transparency for all those joining this public meeting, whether by Zoom, phone, or phone, we request that you refrain from having side conversations in the chat about the content of the meeting. Again, the chat feature is utilized simply as a tool for you to virtually indicate that you would like to, to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. Going forward, all Legal Services Trust Fund Commission meetings and committee meetings will be posted to the State Bar's website. A friendly reminder that this is a video conference, and please be aware of the surroundings behind you. For those joining Zoom using a computer, when on mute, holding the space bar down will temporarily unmute you. If you use your phone to dial into the meeting, please be sure that your computer microphone is on mute to avoid audio feedback. And while joining via computer, it is highly recommended if an individual loses audio, they can recall separately using the Zoom conference number. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Okay. Thanks, Kim. My name is Eric Iskin, and just to be sure you're on the right flight here, this is the Executive Committee of the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission meeting. So why don't we do a roll call?
Great. Bonashe Gwagi,
Yes, here.
Eric Iskin,
Here.
Kim Savage. Oh, Kim's there. Okay. Oh yeah,
You're
just
visible, but on mute.
here. Okay, no problem. Rich Rhinus.
Here.
Great. We have everyone. Eric, can I do staff and liaison?
Yeah, sure.
Selena Copeland. I saw Selena. Bonnie, is Bonnie on? No. I didn't see Christine. I did not see Mark. Dan's on. Is Brady on?
I've
No.
not seen
Okay.
Brady.
Oh, Brady.
No Brady. Okay. Are there any other members of the public who would like to introduce yourself? I don't see anybody, right, Kim?
There's nobody.
There's nobody else. Okay.
Okay.
So that's roll call.
Thank you, Dwan. Is there any comment from member of the public? I guess not, because there's no members of the public here. Well, any public comment? Okay, so let's move on to the action items. And let's see, do we have a meeting agenda or an action item set to approve here somewhere?
Yes, we have on the consent is the approval of the action summary for May.
Oh, yeah. So that, yeah, let's take that up. Any comment on the action summary for the May 12th meeting? Do I hear a motion?
I move to approve as written.
Second.
Second. Okay.
Okay, Bonashe second. Okay, I'll do quick roll call. Bonashe,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Kim,
Yes.
Rich.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, great. So let's move on to Roman 4, the discussion and action items. And I guess, Dwan, are you going to give the update on the PLL?
Yeah, I just have a really quick update. Everything is on timeline. We've notified all the grant recipients that were granted award, and we notified all the applicants that didn't receive award. And there were some disappointments, and Chris and I have talked to a couple organizations and walked them through their scoring and provided some feedback and some TA for the next time around. Grant agreements have gone out. And we're going to start the invoicing. As you'll recall, the grant revenue for this is over 2 courses of attorney fee cycle. So we're able to issue half of the grant payment now and the other half next year when the fee bill comes through. So all the grant recipients know about that. It's built into the grant award. Should revenue come back lower than we projected, we'll have to do a pro rata from that. But we tend to project conservatively, so hopefully it won't come to that.
Okay, thank you. And again, great job on that on the PLL grants for Dwan and Chris.
Oh yeah, Chris really did the lion's share of that. It was a really, it's the first time we've done that type of grant. So we learned a lot. We did a lot of research into other types of fellowship type programs. And so if we ever have this opportunity again, I think we have a good setup moving forward.
Rich, did you have a comment? You had your hand up. No comment? Okay.
Yes, I did have a comment. It was simple, but my dog is barking, and if he interrupts, I'll mute again. But just a quick question, and that is, are we still collecting funds at the projected rate?
For IOLTA or for the PLL grants?
PLL.
Oh, the PLL, so the fee cycle for 2021, it's already ended. We received a number, which Chris and I were surprised, of late payments, but that usually comes through like in February, March. So I would say there might be some stragglers, but the vast majority of the revenue for 2021 cycle is in.
And did it match what we thought it was going to be?
Yeah. And it's still now, it's just adding, so anything that comes in will just be thrown into the general for so that if there's some shortfall for next year, we'll be okay.
Okay, great. Any further comment on that item? So Dwan, do you want to give us the update on grants administration?
Yeah, just a really quick update. And I'm so glad Selena and Lauren are on, because when we walk through the agenda, we'll talk a little bit, we'll give you a high level update on like not only the preview, well, part of the preview for the agenda item for the commission meeting is going to be an item about increased funding. But because of that, our staff, we've been through in a lot of planning session. Elizabeth and I are starting to gear up with the staff on how to build out more grant applications, how to get everything in order. So we have, I would say, not just weekly, but every other day, it's like a strategic planning session to make sure where we're geared up when the actual number comes through very soon in a couple of weeks, that we'll be working towards distributing those additional funds. We have a new senior program analyst who's going to be starting July 12th. She has experience in both data evaluation. She used to work at the Virginia legislature. So a lot of experience with policy work, with data analysis. So we are hoping to staff her on doing HP evaluations. And we are now pivoting also to thinking about like EEF grant evaluations and analyzing all the data that we have, just because we are going to be getting an increase in EEF funding. So we're getting kind of our house in order in anticipation of all the work that's to come this year and then the next couple of years because of the increased funding. So it's great. I mean, the staff feels, I mean, we're all really excited. We've been talking about it at the program team meeting, and everybody's just, I mean, it's a good place right now for legal aid funding. So
yeah,
we're just planning towards that.
Good place.
Increased work and funding.
Good place for California budgeting. A lot of money.
Yeah.
Is that anything further on that, Dwan, or should we move on?
Nothing else, unless anybody else has questions on staffing. Oh, and I should also mention, because I know I sent out the email. I can't even keep track of my days. A couple of days ago, the State Bar did announce their new executive director, and Leah Wilson will be rejoining the State Bar on July 12th as the executive director. So I don't know if anybody else has questions on staffing or what's going on in our office. We're still doing remote monitoring visits, and we think probably through the end of the year it will maintain remote, and then we'll figure out next year.
Do we anticipate that the meetings, the bar meetings, the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission meetings, and subcommittee meetings are going to continue to be on Zoom for the rest of the year?
No, that's a really good question, and that's probably something that XCOM we should start talking about. Maybe I'll build it in. We can build it in for the next agenda item. So I know for the State Bar itself, we are going to be in a slow transition back, and it's not going to be back 100%. There'll be probably some hybrid situation, as in a lot of, I think, workforces. I know the Board of Trustees has requested that they would like their board meetings to be in person, I think effective as soon as we can make it happen. I think having it the last year, I would say that there's some commission meetings, some committee meetings that would be worthwhile in person, but we've had better attendance rate. And I think I've talked to a couple other people that, you know, with sub entities and stuff, that seems to be, at least from the people I've heard, that generally the case. And it's been nice in terms of, you know, we've always been a little bit slanted towards more commissioners in Northern California. And it's really kind of helped with that equity and participation. So I would encourage us to maybe think of also kind of a hybrid schedule, maybe with the commission meeting in person, or, you know, for half of them, or maybe 3, but with the committee level, then I think some of those could be probably more remote. Some of the rules committee is really intense. That work is like, it would be helpful if we were in the same room together looking at the statute and the rules. But some of the other committees, I think it's worked out really nice remotely. You know, the one thing is we have lost out on like that human connection, and you being able to develop that relationship with one another and staff. And so I would encourage some of them being in person, but I don't know if we need to be 100% in person like we used to be.
Yeah. Any of the other commissioners have thoughts about that, preferences?
I actually, okay.
Go ahead, Kim.
I was just gonna say, I like the in-person. I think they're important. But I also recognize that the commute is really rough for some people. I mean, if you live in the Bay Area, immediate Bay Area, going into the state bar office is not really that big of a deal. But for others, I certainly understand it. And when I lived in LA, I mean, I lived in Long Beach and would go to the meetings in LA. You know, I knew what that traffic was like. So, you know, maybe a few in person would be good. Maybe, I don't know how to figure out the numbers. Maybe staff should propose something to the commission. I'm curious what other people think. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I share your view. I kind of miss the in-person gatherings. It was kind of fun to have lunch together and kind of be in the same room. But I also obviously appreciate the convenience of this. I take it you can't do both at the same time. You can't have a Zoom option and an in-person meeting. Does that
You know,
make
we're trying to figure out the technology with that, and I've seen like really interesting articles from like more fancy like tech companies where they have, and there's like a screen there, and like the person is up, like they're sitting there, but on a video. I mean, I don't think the state bar is that sophisticated, but I wonder if there may be some way to integrate it a little bit more.
Yeah, it'd be nice. Unless there are any more comments on
Oh,
that.
Rich has his hand up, Eric.
Go ahead, Rich, sorry.
No problem. I think that for client members of the commission, this is a boon. This, you know, over the years, our client members have struggled to come to our meetings. It's costly and time consuming for them. And I think that being able to facilitate that would get greater involvement. And the more involvement we have with client members, the better.
Well, and I think it'll help us with recruitment. You know, most of us are based in urban locations, and I don't think it's a coincidence because the state bar, I mean, our meetings are in person. So I think it will help with the rural recruiting in the more remote areas. And Eric, Claire, who's a member of the public, has her hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Claire.
Kim, can you unmute Claire?
Trying to.
Here we go.
Oh, there we go.
There she go.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Two things. One is I would encourage the ability to have people attend these meetings. I know that for me, for example, it's been extraordinary to participate as a member of the public. And then the other comment to share with you is that recently in the city of Sonoma, we've been doing meetings that have been hybrid, where the council has been meeting in person and they've been doing Zoom access to people. And that seems to work pretty well as a hybrid, increasing access, but giving the committee the ability to have that in-person benefit.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah. Trying to get my head around how that works. Not that we want to spend an hour this afternoon trying to.
Well, and you know, I don't know if you'll recall, but the Bagley-Keene kind of requirements were relaxed a little bit during COVID. So you don't all have to notice, you know, your location. So when you do again, I don't know how that plays into it, but it'll make it a little bit more difficult.
All right, well, do you want to move on to the preview of the June 25th meeting agenda?
Sure. So let me share my screen and just walk everybody through it. Give me a second to pull it up. So just keep in mind, this is a draft agenda. I sent a version to Eric and Bonachet. They didn't have comments, but our internal has to review it before we post it. Can you see this, or is it too small? You can
See it? I can see
Okay,
it.
great. So I'll just walk you through it really quickly. The consent items, you'll notice there's 3 instead of 1 approval. We had 2 clerical mistakes for grant awards in our November 13th meeting and our December 15th meeting. So just quick corrections to that. I'll provide an update of monitoring visits, how many we've done. You hear an update from the 2 Erica, our Erica and Erica Carroll from Eligibility and Budget Committee. Basically, all the IELTS and EF applications have come through. We received 8 new applicants. It looks like 2 of them probably will not qualify because they didn't submit an audit and are not making strides to. So that leaves us with 6. And they range from very small to very large. I shared that also, we share that with the legal aid community just so they have a sense of, how our numbers will be increasing. I'll provide another update on the PLL grants and just taking the whole commission through the process and kind of high level what was approved and the grant awards that were approved. We'll walk everybody through. I sent out the 2020 audit, and it was we didn't have any findings in the audit. It was another pretty good audit. There was one really technical finding related to the state bar finances that touches on our office that I'm going to ask our finance team to walk everybody through it. And we've already kind of worked with finance to develop a protocol so that next year it won't happen again. And it has to do with accounts receivable, how we book our revenue. With our IELTS remittances, it comes. The finance team will go more into this, but basically we get an indication from banks when the revenue comes in, but it might not. The check might not show up for like a month or 2 later, and it's just really a matter of timing on how we book it. So usually at the end of the year, it gets shored up, and at the last year, the end of the year, it got booked in like January instead of December when it should be booked in December. And since we're on accrual, it should be booked in December because it needs to be from January to December. So it didn't cash a big chunk of revenue. It wasn't that it was missing, it just wasn't booked in the correct year, the way the accounting folks would like it. So very, very technical, but we have a protocol in place for moving forward that won't happen again. And then the big one, the update on legal aid funding. Selena, would you mind, because it's pretty complicated, giving everybody kind of the high level?
I'm happy to give high level. I think the easiest way to understand it is that there's 2 pots of funding that we've been advocating for here in California. There were several of us who were advocating for an increase to equal access fund. And there was a coalition of advocates, and LAC was involved in both, a coalition of advocates working on increasing funding for housing related services. And so ultimately what's currently in the legislature's budget, which will be presented to the governor, that the governor will have to act on. So I keep saying, don't count your chickens. We don't know what it will say in the end. But right now, there is a promise of $50 million in new funding for Equal Access Fund next year. But thankfully they heard when we said that please give us 2 years to spend that, because it was going to be one-time funding of $50 million. And programs would not really love that. So right now for the base Equal Access Fund, it's an additional $50 million. And they have in their plan to make it ongoing an additional $20 million after that. All of that, we don't know what's going to be in the final plan. We don't know what's going to happen next year. But for base Equal Access Fund, it's an additional $50 million. 20 million extra ongoing after that, with a set aside for what we're calling infrastructure grants that the California Commission on Access to Justice will administer those grants. I'm not going into the weeds on that, but I'm happy to answer questions about that. But
Selena, let me just talk about partnership a little bit right there, because as part of the EF funding is 10% goes to partnership grants. So I know like Eric's on the partnership committee, and that they pretty much concluded their recommendations for the 2022 year. But because the way the state budget is on a June through June calendar year, and because it's a big increase, we're beginning talks with the Judicial Council whether we want to open up the application and perhaps do supplemental funding for, there were about $3.5 million of requests, and I think we ended up funding so there's another million in there that we were not able to fund because of lack of resources. Perhaps we fund that piece. That's worthwhile. The other consideration is because it's a sizable amount that we might not be able to spend next year, that perhaps there are some programs that might be able to gear up fast enough to add on a couple $100,000 to a project. So I think that's all kind of moving pieces that we're trying to figure out. And as soon as we actually have the firm number, it'll allow us to plan a bit better. But those are conversations that we've been having with Bonnie at the Judicial Council, and Crystal, who's the staff here. We've included her in the conversation because there is potentially going to be pretty much another RFP for partnership grants this year instead of next year.
How much is the base EAF funding?
The like current base is 20 million of state general funds and about 5.5 million of filing fees.
So
And that
this would-
filing fee has been really volatile. There are years that's only been 2.5. So this is a really significant increase for EAF.
But wait, there's more.
But there's more, yes.
And a very quick note on partnership grants. We had raised the issue, State Bar staff had been concerned that if we had to push out the money very quickly, and with the 50 million, what if it was only 1 year? How can we do partnership grants? We actually got the legislature to write in the ability to not use the full 10% for partnership grants. And so if you don't have enough strong applications, you can actually roll over what is unused in partnership grants for the general equal access fund. So there is that flexibility now in the current language. And then now for but wait, there's more with another caveat from Donna. So the other piece, which Lauren Klein was really involved in this, is opening up federal funds for legal aid. So there is federal funds related to the federal stimulus dollars that a lot of states have been using for legal services. And right now what's in the legislature's budget is 120 million to be allocated over 3 years. So it's $40 million a year for very broadly homelessness prevention. And a lot of the advocates have been really pushing to allow sub-grants specifically to local governments. So that is permissible. And also advocates have been pushing to allow a lot more tenant outreach and tenant education. So that's also currently in the language. But it's mostly a copy and paste from the old homelessness prevention, but the legislature did tweak it a little bit. And then just a really quick caveat is Donna noticed, so I thought that they intentionally left partnership grants in there, but Donna thinks it doesn't make any sense because they're allowing a partnership set aside, and we think it's a copy paste issue. So we'll raise that with staff because it is a little bit confusing, legislative staff. It is a little bit confusing because it does have kind of like homelessness prevention breakdown and one piece of that budget code, but then it also says up to 10% for partnership grants. So we'll make sure it's really clear and not impossible for staff to administer. But that's another 40 million a year if we get it. And then it won't come through this area, but I just wanted to flag that there's other funding for legal aid too, just for background knowledge. Currently in the legislature's budget, I haven't looked at the language recently, but it did include 20 million to be spent over 3 years for legal services for seniors. And that would go through the California Department of Aging as it currently goes through. And I have to admit, I haven't looked at that in the last couple of days because a lot of things just went into print. But that is additional background information that's really helpful for you to know that the organizations that are serving seniors maybe get a little bit of extra funds, that 20 million over 3 years.
But the HP funding, there's language in there that's similar to the HP one of we need to distribute it as soon as practically possible. And the last time the commission read that to be at least a formula that would be a distribution this year, like we wouldn't be able to wait 6 months and justify that that's a quick distribution. Though there was a little bit more leeway with the RFP. So if we're on that super expedited schedule again, it's going to be more, we welcome the work, but the HP committee is going to have to really gear up to distribute formula and RFP and then partnership, potentially another RFP.
Is the 40 million, the 120 million over 3 years, is the idea that it would all be distributed by our commission?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So our rough math is next year might be over $100,000 million in distribution. So
That's really exciting.
it's really exciting. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's a very good time for legal aid funding. And programs can really start to plan for services that they've always said, if only I have the money, well, this is the time. You will have the money if you know.
I just have to comment that this is, so surprising that I laugh out of like discomfort because we're so used to dealing with scarcity. And the legal aid community has watched IOLTA drop, and we watched it drop back in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. And to have this in the middle of a pandemic, to have all of this additional funding for legal aid when people actually need legal aid is just really interesting. And I am very sorry that Dwan staff has to do so much work, but this is just an amazing opportunity.
And I should also mention a couple weeks ago, we partnered with LAC and the Judicial Council to do two back-to-back convening. One was on the HP evaluation and one was on the funding. This is when we had more of a soft number. So we just wanted to get everybody to start to think about the increase. And Selena's been doing a great job keeping everyone posted, because there's like new developments pretty much every week, every day, keeping the community posted because we need everybody to start planning for the increase in 2022 because it takes a while to staff up and to plan. And so we've been really trying to encourage that, as well as encouraging an increase in legal aid salary and staff salary. Because this is the time that we have the funding to help with recruitment and retention issues. But the thing is what Selena's saying about programs always being used to kind of like scarce resources. It's hard to get them in the mindset that that there's more funding. So to plan when the environment is a bit more plentiful. But it's really great though.
Yeah, really great. Is there, this is a somewhat related question. Well, I don't know if it's related to anything, but is there going to be any money for rental relief that you guys are aware of? It's not.
Yeah, I think Lauren might be the best person to answer that, but my understanding, and Lauren, is from the ARCA money, there's a lot of rental assistance money. And some of the agency that is distributing that already is starting to process application. I believe there were like 20,000 applications that are processed. And I think there was an error in something, they're reprocessing it, but some of that money is already starting to flow out. Lauren, do you know the amount? I can never remember.
Off the top of my head, it's a lot of money though, and it's not getting out as quickly as one would hope, and they're trying to correct some of those issues. And it's been helpful to talk to the legislature about that 40 million and about how legal aid can really help people to make sure that they're applying and getting that rental relief. So I think that can be a big piece of what legal aid is doing with the increased funding too.
But Lauren, doesn't it cover like 80% of rent or something? It's a lot for.
It's 80% now, and it will go up to 100%. Governor Newsom announced this with his May revised budget, which will be really great because we're hearing from programs that there's landlords out there that will refuse the 80%, which is really too bad. But I think that once 100% is available, there'll be more landlords that are going to be forced to take that money, and perhaps some legal recourse if they don't. So it's really great.
Who's administering the funds?
It's the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Oh, HCD is doing it.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Thank
they
you.
reached out to LAC a few weeks ago to coordinate with us, and they're already working with Bonnie, and they're already working with Western Center. And so we're doing a training next week at HCD's request that's designed, I think, also for landlords to understand, because what we're really hoping to do is get landlords to agree to take that 80 or 100%. And so that's a training that we're working on with HCD next week.
Are we noticing, like for folks, let's say that move out now, that have only been paying 25% of their rent, so they still theoretically actually owe 75%, but the budget hasn't passed yet. I mean, are landlords keeping their powder dry? Are they going after people for this money? I mean, is there a way to say, hold on, aid is coming, don't sue these people? I'm just kind of wondering what the world is like. If anybody knows, maybe you guys don't really know, but curious.
I've just been, what I hear kind of in the press, it's probably been a mix. There are lots of predatory landlord, you know, a lot of them in more rural and remote areas, as you can tell, less legal services, but have been pretty much evicting their tenants, but using other kind of veiled reasons. I know that's been going on a lot. Kim, do you have any insights?
Well, I don't think they can't go through an eviction process, so they're getting them out in other ways.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
oh gosh, you know, we're not gonna fix these habitability defects. Or
I've heard about a lot of self-help.
yeah, a lot of self-help on the part of the illegal self-help on the part of the landlord.
Yeah.
You know, it's you know, frankly, it's not that much different from when there isn't a pandemic.
Mhm.
You know, because of vacancy decontrol. But I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled about the amount of funding that's coming in.
And I've also heard
Good
from
news.
landlords that their renters don't understand the rules, and when landlords want to participate to get the 80%, they can't get their renters to sign off because the renters are just like a little wary of signing and participating in the process. So there does continue, I mean, despite all the websites and all the news, there continues to be a need for tenant outreach and tenant education, so that they understand that if the landlord says, this is a document that gets, you know, the state to pay me 80%, then the tenant knows that it's not a scam, because it just sounds like a scam.
Mhm. Mhm.
Is it anticipated that legal services providers would be involved in providing this rental assistance?
In providing the actual dollars, no. I anticipate that legal services programs will help guide tenants or landlords into how to access it, but it's all being handled by HCD and a private entity that they've contracted with.
Thank you.
So somebody preparing materials for HCD that will be understood by the tenant.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd throw that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Western Center is working with them.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
I mean, Dwan, just looking at the agenda, that is likely to, at least in Roman 4 of your agenda, that's likely to be the most interesting piece of it. I'm just wondering if you don't want to move that up.
Yeah, you know, and the other thing is, I should say, you know, I try to order it because the legal aid funding might then give insights into the IOLTA distribution, but you'll see, and when we get to it, we're gonna have to take this out of order because we're gonna go into closed session to talk about the expungement issue and then come back out to provide the staff recommendation and the commission motion. But Brady is like straddling 2 meetings. There's paraprofessional meeting that day, so we actually have to move him to the top of the hour. So this is the order, but it's going to be reworked, I think, in practice.
Do you want to go on to the business items?
Yeah, so, and that's why we did the legal aid funding first, because I think it will flow nicely with IOLTA distribution. So I'll just give really high level because we're going to go into painstaking detail during the commission meeting, but really good news on the IOLTA front. Last year when we did projections, and you'll recall this time last year, it had been only a month or two when the Fed funds dropped their interest to near zero. At that time, we thought that we would close out 2020 with about $27 million. When we actually closed the books, we brought in 36 million. So there is an additional about 10 million there that we have more that we didn't know we had. We're starting to run the numbers for 2021, and we can only base it on the remittances that have come through April. So as you know, our projection for 2022, it's really based on 2021 revenue. But when you go to make the determination, the recommendation for the Board of Trustees, we only have 4 months of bank remittances at that time, and then we have to project out for the rest of the year. So it's very tricky, and it's, you know, it's a projection. So that's the big caveat. We're revising that projection weekly, and it's a very volatile situation right now. The good news is that this time last year, we were projecting IOLTA revenue. This was like the worst case scenario, right? That it would bottom down to about $14 million, 8.2 for IOLTA, and then our Justice Gap Nation. So the total for IOLTA revenue would be about 14 million. We now have revised that based on April remittances to about 25, 26. We're firming up that number right now. The one big caveat though, is that we had seen a very steady trend of the last year through about February, March of this year. April took a little bit of a dip. I wouldn't say it's concerning, but it was a 10% dip, which has been significant. We had thought that there was going to be a more sharp decrease earlier on. That hadn't happened, and that's why IOLTA has remained pretty much. We had that one big dip at the beginning when the Fed funds rate, but we thought there was going to be more dips, and that hasn't played out. It had been more 1% instead of the 10% that we thought. April, though, did take a 10%, and what happened is we have our top 10 banks generate the majority of our revenue, and some of our lower top 10 banks, like number 7, 8, 9, 10, are no longer leadership banks. And so the number like 12, 13, 14 have moved up and become top 10, but their the amount of their net access are a lot less. And so it's making that's what's causing the decrease. So something that we're keeping an eye on very closely. We don't think it's a moment of concern yet, but definitely something that we want to keep in mind as we go and make a recommendation for the distribution. The other thing that I wanted to share with you all is that we do work with national consultants, to help us with the bank compliance piece, and they have a handle on what's happening nationally and other states. And I think I've shared this before. California has been really like doing better than most other states, and I want to say he said we were doing the best, but don't quote me on that. We're at least at the top 3, top 4 there in terms of maintaining kind of IOLTA revenue. He gave us a heads up that later this year, he thinks that our office, as well as other IOLTA programs, are going to have to gear up for recertification, but it could be good or bad. So good would mean Fed funds rate increases, and we're rushing to get banks to recertify because interest rates have now gone up, and it's going to be a new benchmark in interest rates, and we have to get them in compliance. Bad would be Fed funds rate doesn't drop, and because of that, banks are now going to be a little bit more wary, and they could have dropped, but they haven't dropped. And now, because they're a little bit more nervous, they might then start dropping. We don't really think that's probably going to happen, but the thing is, we wanted to make you aware because it's just very volatile right now, and we're going to be able to make a recommendation to you, to make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees of a pretty, a significant distribution for 2022. But we will have to keep that in mind as kind of risk assessment, because if that happens, we want to have enough of a reserve to buffer that in the event that happened. Though it might not be likely, that has been something that people are everybody across all the other states are kind of. We're just a little bit wary right now, even though the economic forecast has been moving in a really, really positive direction. So in summary, what staff is going to recommend is pretty much an IOLTA distribution of about $38 million for 2022, based on a moderate projection. And we'll go through that at the commission meeting. But that means it's going to be pretty much a 55% increase from last year, which is great. The one thing I want to note for you, though, is that we're recommending, the reserve policy says between 30 and 75%. We're recommending really middle of the road there, 50%, because I think it might be prudent to build up the reserve a little bit. And we're not even talking about a lot. At a 50% reserve, it's about $12 million, just a buffer if anything would go awry. And so that's the really great news, as that we are able to say that IOLTA grants are going to be increasing next year rather than dropping. And so that is just welcome news all around, and not something that, frankly, I was telling Salita earlier today, Elizabeth and I had to ask finance to run all the numbers again, because it was just so unbelievable that in this kind of environment, everything that's happened, that we would be able to have this luxury of distributing this amount of money. So it's really great.
Dawn, all of this is great. All of this is great. How much of these numbers have you guys discussed with Jeff?
So Carolina has been keeping Jeff involved, and Jeff really understands the volatility of just the economy right now. Everybody I know has been hearing on the news about inflation. This is all really playing in, and it's very complicated. So he's been helping us really, again, confirm our understanding with the consultants, because they've been saying the same, but it's been so nice to have Jeff as a sounding board. We do plan to meet with him next week and run through the projection in more details, and show him the spreadsheet and show him the different scenarios, and really get into the weeds with him a little bit more, because he has such a good understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, I would be, I'm not sure about my colleagues here and of course on the commission, but I would be very curious to hear his input
Mhm.
because his fingers are on the pulse of it
Yeah.
all. I think he's the president of the
Mhm.
Banking Association
Yeah,
in the, if not in the state of California, but for the country. So
yeah.
I really would like to hear his input. You know, we were, as we all remember, very adamant about making sure that the groups, that all the grantees were going to receive funding last year, and we would support through that process. So I'm really happy to
Mhm.
hear that our results in those discussions were successful in this way.
Mhm.
And you know, right now, as Selena said, you know, we're in a state of abundance, and I'm not surprised that the programs are concerned as to how long would this last. So keeping all of those conversations that we had, both sides of the debate alive through Jeff's lens would be really helpful.
No, Jeff has been
as we're looking at
really
this
incredible. He's been like, I know Carolina has been able to just, you know, bounce ideas, and so he's been really, really helpful. It's so nice to have somebody on the commission that has that expertise, and hopefully we're gonna have a new commissioner that has a banking background, so that'll help.
Yeah, so we're gonna actually have two commission members with a banking background, which I think is exactly what we need as we're going forward. So it's great.
Rich has raised his hand.
Yeah, I can't see you guys, so yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Just a question for Dwan. Do you foresee any debate at the trustee level with respect to the commission's role in distributing the new funds received from the legislature?
I don't think so. I mean, the thing is, I think our work has spoken for itself. If we weren't doing a good job in distributing the money kind of responsibly and having proper oversight, I don't think the legislature and programs would continue to provide us with additional funding. So I don't think so. I think everybody's been really, really pleased with the work of the commission and staff on this. I know, Selena, if you, it seems like all aboard, you know, every time we do board updates and we always send around the funding, and everybody is just, it's all around very happy about the work of this office.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my doorbell rang, so I had to go answer. It was a neighbor kid. Yeah, as far as I know from talking with legislative staff, they're you know, incredibly supportive of this commission doing all of this work. And you know, whenever they are finding new funding sources for legal aid, and they're trying to figure out what is the most like authoritative body to distribute those funds, this is the body that we always recommend. And so that's why you know, for all the additional work that Dwan and her staff will have to do next year, that's why this will be the home for the vast majority of all of those dollars.
What you know, and I think if it's okay with you, I'll build into the next agenda for XCOM is I know the workload has been quite heavy for the commissioners the last few years, and then with increased funding, so we should start to think about whether what places like we could best utilize you, because it's our day job, but it's not yours, and sometimes it does feel like it's become yours. And so to make it more manageable, I think, for commissioners as well.
I do have to say that the workload is perfectly fine when it, for me, when it comes to giving out money for programs. You know, it's like one of the really happy things to do as a commissioner, as opposed to help craft the really kind of cautious and pessimistic messaging. So, you know, I think for most people on the commission, you know, when it comes to providing more funding for programs, we're all pretty willing to put in the time.
You know, I want to echo what Kim just said. We're all volunteers, as everybody knows. We're giving of ourselves to the best of our ability. But I echo what Kim says. When it comes to being able to give more money, if I can expand that 24 hours to 28 hours, I will do that. It's a joy, of course, with oversight. I want to make sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and Dwan, I would say that the additions you've made to staff have really been helpful in that respect. I mean, the legwork that they do really helps to make our job a lot easier.
No, thank you. You know, we have a really excellent staff, and now we're just really thinking about like the future in terms of we've had the same amount of level of staffing, but our level of funding has increased. I don't even know, by X amount. And so to think about like having the proper infrastructure and also the scrutiny for the amount of funding that we give, it's different when you distribute $20-30 million versus 100 million. And I think we do currently a good job, but obviously there are places that I think we could do an even better job. And with this level of funding, I think we have a responsibility to make sure that there's proper oversight.
So is there a role for the commission in advocating for more staff, given the workload? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there just to ask about the appropriateness of that.
Our executive staff has been very, very gracious. We've had this ongoing conversation with Donna, and she's already given us our blessing. It's really just a matter of hiring the staff. Which has been the struggle. And I don't think it's our just unique to the state bar. It seems like other places are struggling hiring too. And the thing is, we want to bring on the right staff because the work is not easy. So it has to be, you know, people that like can analyze, can write, are dedicated, the right staff, because we want it to work out for them and for us. So we had a number of applications. We had close to 30 applications for this past senior program analyst. I interviewed 8, and then we brought 4 to the second round, but only one to me was we were excited about. And I just don't want to make an offer just because. So I think that's why we're continuing. So there are people, but it's finding the right staff.
Yeah, it's a unique role. And it's a role that involves a number of skill sets.
Yeah.
So I think what you're doing in being deliberate is important, and who you've brought on thus far, you know, as has already been said, they're commendable. They're great additions.
Yeah, they're really excellent. I mean, I would say the staff across the board is very good. We just need more of them. So if we can just, you know, 2, 3 more would I think we're good. We have I mean, the structure is there. It's just really now building out.
Tuan, did you want to move on to the other business item?
Yes, and Rich had I think.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can't, for some reason, Juan, when you're sharing your screen, my gallery view is blocked. Okay. I don't know if others are experiencing
that.
And
I don't need to share it. There's just only a couple. I just can read them to you. Sorry, go ahead, Rich. Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Rich.
I'm trying to, there we go. I went through a round of funding on a foundation that I serve as trustee for many years. And during the last year, a lot of our recipients changed their workload to accommodate hybrid or remote presentations. And this is principally for children in the arts. But there was inadequate communication from the grant recipients to the foundation with respect to the use of the funds not being as anticipated, not being as budgeted. And surprisingly, there was very little carryover. For example, UC Riverside, one of our grant recipients, has a fellows program which we sponsor, and the number of presentations made by those fellows in the community had to be reduced substantially. So the question came, how well you're going to funds that were attributable to those presentations went elsewhere, where did they go? And was there enough advanced communication? And I wonder if we have had anything like that in terms of, which would surface as carryover, you'd expect. What you'd expect to see is that because of remote activity and the reduced client activity at premises, you would see funds used for other purposes or carry over. But I don't see in our applications a huge carryover to account for that. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah, you know, I don't know if huge is a word, but we have seen it shifts because of the pandemic and remote services. I did get a number of, I can't tell you exactly off the top of my head, but requests from programs shifting to technology because people are buying more computer and trying to get the setup for their staff. And then, there's been more requests because of all the federal money that's coming through the PPE. So that's been going to salaries. So because IOTA is so flexible, they've shifted from salaries to something else. So there has been, and the latest HP, when we ran the evaluations for the homelessness prevention and the partnership, there were definitely shifts because of court closures and so forth. But people are still doing really good work. It's just not because of the court closures. A lot of those services are being provided remotely. So the budget just looks slightly different. Oh, Claire has her hand up. Eric?
Yeah, go ahead, Claire.
Kim, can you unmute Claire?
Let's, I think we've got you there.
Yeah, me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. One thing I just wanted to make sure is on everyone's radar, because we've seen this with all of our grantees, is that the PPP loans are going to make 2020 and 2021 financials look very different. And so we've been recommending to all of our grantees to have an addendum that they're putting into their budgets and their minutes to make sure that that's referenced, because it will appear for the next couple of years that these organizations are running big surpluses when in fact that's not the case.
That's a good thought, because we're starting to review our applications, but the audits that we review are back a year, so we're not catching that yet. But that's something that we probably should note for them moving forward.
Yeah, what we saw was bloated payroll due to hazard pay and the cost of remote. So it sort of absorbed the funds that might otherwise have been used for presentation purposes. And I'd expect to see the same thing. The PPP loans will make those financial statements very odd.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Dawn, you want to go on the partnership?
Yeah, I'll go on. There's just a couple more agenda items, so I'll be quick. The next one, big item that comes at this June commission meeting every year is the approval of the partnership grants. And most of the, if you're not familiar with partnership grants, most of the applicants are repeat applicants. They come back for second, third, fourth, fifth year. There's only a handful of new applicants. And so Crystal and Christina can provide an overview of those new applicants. Then we'll go into the liaison reports. And then the last agenda item is the closed session on expungements. So we're going to take that. Brady's has another meeting, so we'll take that at the top of the hour. And I suspect we'll probably spend maybe a good 30 minutes on that discussion. Selena, if there are people that are interested in making public comments, I would encourage them to come at the beginning and make them so that the commission has at their, it's fresh when they go into the discussion of it. And then obviously once the closed session is over, we'll report out any motion that's being. There is going to be, Brady is sending to the commission a confidential memo. There's a companion staff memo that will be released to the public with the staff recommendation of how to proceed.
Thanks, Dawn. Actually, Dawn, I had a question going back to eligibility and budget. You said there were, I think you said 6 new applicants?
There's 8 new applicants, and we know from our review of, we prioritize and review the 8 new applicants first. 2 of them we're recommending is not qualified because they don't even have their audit. They're not even making an effort to get it. So I think that's just, it'll obviously have to go through the process, but they're not going to qualify. So it's really 6 live ones.
Does that bring us up to what, 110 or something like that?
I think I can't remember if it's 99, 100 if you remember, Dan. So those 6 all qualify.
Those 2.
It'll bring us up to, about 106. And of those 6, I have to say there's one that has qualified expenditures of 11%. So I think it's really more realistic, like 4 or 5.
And are they QLSPs or support centers?
They're all QLSPs. I can't recall a support center. One new law school that Dan's Loyola, that Dan is processing the application, but all QSPs.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got a solid application. Not going to tip my hand, but I don't have much to bring to your attention on that one.
Dawn, when it's relevant for this agenda, I can give you an update on SB 498.
Oh yeah, that's a great, that would be, so I don't have anything else unless you have questions for me on the agenda. I don't have anything else if we want to let Selena provide them.
Yeah, so we had one more item, but yeah, go ahead, Selena. Why don't you give us that update?
Sure. So I'm happy to give an update because it's good news. So SB 498 was the bill that we'd all worked on to increase IELTS eligibility from 125 to 200%, and also to exclude all veterans disability benefits from that income threshold. So we were worried that the bill would not survive because the Senate has capped at 12 bills for every state senator. And I think this was Umberg's 13th bill, but it's still alive. So through the magic of the Senate, SB 498 is still alive. And it will be heard in the Assembly Judiciary Committee on June 22nd. We're currently getting support letters in from our community. We want to make sure that it's shows really strong statewide support. It's also been cross-referred to the Committee on Veterans Affairs. And so they're also involved because of the veterans benefits piece. But the only wrinkle was around figuring out when it would be effective because of the way that you look back on 2020 data now in 2021. And so the way the legislative intent will be codified is that 2022 is when everything changes, where organizations can, assuming it passes, organizations can use their IELTS and Equal Access Fund dollars to serve people who are at that income threshold. And then when they report their 2022 client data, they'll report that to you. But none of it is backwards looking, because that would harm the organizations now who in 2020 and 2021, they were turning away clients because they had no funding to be able to provide those services. It would have the unintended consequence of giving larger share of those grant pots to those larger organizations that had other outside funding. So it's a very clean change. Everything changes on January 1, 2022. And we think that's the best way to deal with the counties in which there are very large organizations and very small organizations, where some would see this like ballooning of their QEs because of the new clients to count.
And we've reworked our rules committee work plan to expedite the changing of the state bar rule for that. And even if the state bar rule is not officially changed, programs will be able to use that new threshold until it's changed, but we were expediting it. So rules committee is going to review it later this year, and then it'll go probably to the commission later this year too, so that it'll expedite it to the board of trustees. We have to send out for public comment and do all that good stuff, but it might be our first official rule change for codification.
So the money we award through this year's eligibility and budget grants for 2022 can be used under the new paradigm.
Yep. Yeah. So we release the updated indigency numbers at the beginning of the year, and we give programs a chart of 125. When we do that, and Dan in our office says that, we're going to change it to 200 and then put a asterisk about the veterans benefit, so it'll be super clear to everyone.
Great. Thanks, Selena. Any questions, comments on that? That good development? We're optimistic it'll pass. Yeah.
Yeah, it passed.
But we should still give support.
Yeah, it passed the Senate with no issues at all. It left the House of Origin really easily. It's now over to the Assembly. And so we just want to make sure it's out of committee and that everyone understands that this is expanding eligibility because so many more people actually need legal aid now, especially because of the pandemic and kind of temporary long-term job loss. So.
Yeah, and this is really fantastic. I mean, we've talked about this in the community for, I don't know, at least 10 years, right, Selena? It's changed, so it's finally happening.
What is 200% of federal poverty in San Francisco? I mean, just if you know, roughly.
It's federal, and I believe it's something, I mean, Kim probably knows off the top of her head, but I think it's like 53,000 for a family of 4.
Oh, that's so much.
Yeah,
better.
probably something like that instead of like the 40 that was or something.
Yeah.
I think it was 34,000.
The 34, okay.
That's a big deal. Okay, any further comments or discussion on that? If not, we can move on to the discussion of priorities, if there is any discussion of priorities. Actually, I wanted to raise one thing, and that is that out of partnership grants, and then I think also out of PLL, we noted a kind of weakness in the evaluation metrics that we're getting from programs. And one of the to-do items, maybe for both of those projects, was to try to make our evaluation protocols more robust. Do you know, am I remembering this correctly, Dwan?
I wasn't part of that partnership grant committee, but I am in the planning sessions between the State Bar and Judicial Council around evaluations. And our thought is that we were going to have a training for all grantees very soon, the next month or two, to provide with more technical assistance. And I don't know what you mean by robust. I think on our end, the reporting apparatus is good. I think for programs, they are struggling with building their own, because with partnership, they have to have an evaluation. They don't just report for us, like the main economic benefits and all that number, the CSR, they also have to evaluate their program. And some programs are struggling with that. So our idea is we'll provide training, technical assistance on how to do our reporting. But in addition to that, maybe we'll have some like out of the box evaluations that they can adapt in terms of like client satisfaction. Like we might be able to see some of the, because we have insight into all the evaluations. So we might, we'll take a closer look, see if there are any that stand out, and maybe just ask those programs and we can share that and create a template from there, so that if a program that's smaller and they don't have the bandwidth or they don't know how to create a client satisfaction evaluation or how to evaluate, at least that's something that they can use as a starting point. So those are some of the things is that what you're referring? Okay.
Yeah, on the partnership grants particularly, I know, Dan, we had this conversation a lot, that what the grantees submitted was routinely pretty weak.
We share the frustration, and I think that the best path is the one that Dwan was talking about. Back in 2005, I think we provided a statewide conference, because it was all pretty new, to provide some tools, and a lot of those are still good tools, but nobody has their fingers on them anymore.
Yeah,
refreshing
and I'm not sure if you guys talked about
this.
I'm not sure if you talked about this in partnership, but some of the grantees, because they're so there's lack of funding, they just don't put a lot of resources to, especially if they're smaller, to evaluation. So it might not be because they're not providing quality services or the quantity that you're seeing. It might just be a deficiency in their evaluation. So hopefully maybe with the increased money, I know that Selena, Bonnie, and I talked about encouraging programs to spend more, invest more in evaluation. And so perhaps with this increased funding, they can finally do that. The other thought is because there is some admin money for HP, and I believe there's going to be some for EF, that maybe we can start the State Bar building in more support that way. And I don't know, Selena, if LAC provides any evaluation support, but this definitely is kind of like the topic du jour of the last few years with evaluation, because it's so important and everybody's asking for it, even though the movement is also like not so much about numbers. The truth is it's important, right, to have evaluations.
We don't currently provide evaluation support, but Zach Newman, who many of you know is our senior attorney at LAC, he's completing a course at the University of Chicago on data and evaluations. I know, we're very excited about it. He actually applied for a grant from the Bigglesworth Family Foundation, which is paying his tuition. But yeah, we've been talking a lot about, once he has a little bit more of that, I think his courses start pretty soon. Once he has more of that under his belt, we wanted to do some sort of convening on evaluations, because some programs are just way ahead of everybody else in understanding how to evaluate and tell the story along with the data. And they also know how to ask the right questions that funders and legislators will want to know. So we've been kind of talking about it informally, and we would love to collaborate on getting more information to programs about how to do it well, even just learning from each other in the way that we are the conveners of that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea, Selena. And the thing is, like, as you all know, because you review grant applications, that we always have that big debate on what to read within the four corners of the application or the evaluation. And there's an equity issue in that the big programs can invest in like an in-house evaluator or the outsource, whereas the small programs don't have that. And so they're already at an unfair disadvantage.
Right. Well, thank you. That's great.
Oh, Kim has a comment.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify, when I think about evaluations being valuable, I think of not only in terms of the client's satisfaction, but also the program's self-assessment. So I just want to make sure we're talking about both of those things.
Yeah, and I know in the context of partnership, there is a question that asks, and I'm not getting it right, Dan might know, something about like, what do you think you could do to like better improve? And like, I think we asked that with all sincerity, not to judge the programs, but we really want to know what didn't work as well. So really for programs to take an introspective perspective and really, it goes to what you were saying, Kim, but I think sometimes programs are hesitant of like,
Right.
but I think it's important. So I don't know, providing programs with a safe space to tell us so that we can brainstorm, so that they can prove, but it's delicate, right? Because they all know that you all read that and evaluate them on that.
Right,
So,
but that's why I frame it as a
Yeah.
self-assessment as opposed to an evaluation.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was done early on with entities with compliance with certain civil rights statutes like 504 and disability access was, you know, you're not turning it into the government, but it's a self-assessment and you go through this analysis. Of course, we do want to see what they say. I think it's helpful for us in terms of crafting RFPs in the future also.
Yeah.
I mean, like what's realistic, what isn't? You know, is there a framework that would be helpful for us when we draft a new RFP? So I don't think it should be burdensome. You know, programs all feel burdened by paperwork, but I think if they understand kind of the purpose of it, not to ding them, I think we can message it so that we get something helpful.
Yeah.
And on that same note, you know, for me, as we're going through these grant applications year after year, one question that keeps coming up for me is impact. You know, what's the reach? How are they making the differences that they say they're out to make? You know, we all have aspirations, and these grants sound fantastic, but at the end of it, what's happened? How did we move the needle forward? And I think all of that is important. You know, we're currently excited about the amount of dollars that are coming to us from the state. But there have been, you know, if we really look at it, the formula is set up such that currently we can have the kind of funds that are coming to us from state, you know, the governor, the legislature, COVID, there's just a lot of things that are going in the favor of legal aid currently. But there may be a time that it's not like that. And we've been in those droughts as well. So I think having collection of data, real numbers, real like concrete numbers on the kind of impact that the work these programs do from receiving these kinds of funds, it will be challenging to have, you know, a group of folks who are not as receptive as the group that's currently in Sacramento, look at those numbers and push back. So I think overall, right now we're in a positive, literally on the positive side of things. I think we need to set ourselves up for the days that it's not like that. And one pathway is through data collection for impact.
No, I mean, the data is so important because that justifies all of our existence. And we get asked so often, Selena knows, because either Selena gets asked or we get asked directly. We have to turn around the data in like 24 hours. It's a good thing that we actually have good data collection right now. It can be improved, and, you know, but the data has been really important. And programs are getting there. They were resistant 5-7 years ago.
Like, Duana, it's like any kind of investment.
Yeah.
Right? It's literally what's the ROI. So so if we could give them the true return on that investment, the more they will be able to want to support it, right?
Yeah.
And then I think it also helps the programs, you know, flex a muscle and train a muscle that we, you know, those who are in that space may not have had that much training to do.
Selena has also raised her hand. I don't know if I can get you clear there. There you go.
Yeah, Selena, there you go.
Oh, I just wanted to echo what Bonafsha was saying, that the data is really important, and we're in a very different position now. I am optimistic that we'll be in this position for several years. The current legislature really understands the importance of legal aid. As a result of legal aid organizations making relationships with their legislators and all of our education of the leaders in the legislature, But I do remember back in 2016 making the very hard pitch that legal aid is part of the safety net. And everyone asked for data, and we would say, this is part of the safety net of California. You know, here's how people fall through the cracks and how legal aid can catch. And we did not have the data. And now is a really amazing time to get the data to show along a lot of different areas where legislators may care about, like health issues. We can ask questions about health. They may care about women's rights issues, and we can ask questions about, you know, around gender issues. So I think that we can get data that tells a really amazing story to partner with the client narratives and the case studies. And so I agree with what everyone is saying, is that this is the opportunity to collect the data.
Yeah, I mean, and we've been telling programs like the data really does make a difference in terms of the advocacy. And I think that messaging for the most part is resonating, because it is a heavy lift on their part, but it's an investment for all of us, the entire community. So they see that. We're also been changing our data apparatus. We've been improving it over the years, but that also requires programs to tweak their system and also collect more data. So we recognize it's also a hardship. So really trying to find that balance in terms of like what really truly we need and what don't we need. And we're still trying to figure that out. I mean, with our HP funds, we just added another requirement in terms of individual outcome data, because that was requested by the Judicial Council so that we could do more sophisticated demographics analysis. And I would say for the most part, people are open to it, but we've gotten a lot of feedback from the grant staff, like, we want to do it, but oh my gosh, how can we do it? This is so much work. It's going to be so much entry. And so we're just really trying to provide that support, because it's going to be rough until everybody's up and going and used to kind of churning over the data like that.
And that's the point, that if we could start the training and development now, over the course of the few years that we have the kind of support that we have out of Sacramento, that by the time, you know, should there be a time of like 2016 again, I remember that, Selena. I mean, it was rough. So if, you know, if we could be planning ahead like that, but even without that as the draw and the impetus, we should just be doing that. We should be asking these programs to be doing that, to really understand what's happening with the dollars.
I think this is probably a good time that we should maybe start resurrecting like the reboot committee. And for the commissioner that don't remember, you know, that was a staff-led effort, but we had commissioners on the reboot committee, like Corey. I can't remember, Kim, if you were on it, but I remember Corey was on it. I know Donna was on it when she was on the commission. That really helped. And so, you know, maybe we need a more formal space so that we can help programs and move that work forward. But we are going to get more data requests. I mean, we just got one from the Department of Finance yesterday related to the HP funds, and luckily we have the data so we can provide it. But
sure, it's going to continue, because it's the only way to be able to track what's happening. And there really is a science behind this. So there really is. There are real questions to ask to get real data points. So if we can, you know, in-house begin to train and develop the staff, and like Selena saying, you know, their team is taking on some of these courses, then that could be embedded into the applications, and then there could be a convening and a training with the programs themselves, and really giving it a 2 to 3 year runway until it becomes part and parcel of everyone's activities.
I think it's a great idea to elevate it to the commission level and re-up some kind of a committee, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I'd be happy to serve on it, actually, or chair it, or whatever you want. Did you say there's going to be a convening?
We had a convening to share the HP evaluation data as a preview, because we did a midterm evaluation and we wanted to share it with all the grantees, so that we have a sense as a community what we've achieved and what we're going to work towards. You know, the big caveat with that data is the courts were closed, and so the outcomes look a lot different than what they had anticipated. And that's been the big caveat. We sent that report up to the legislature, and everybody seems to be fine with the numbers, but with the expectation that, you know, once the final evaluation comes through, that we need to show a little bit more for it, because we're going to be getting more HP money. So I think it was a good reminder for programs that data is so important. and to get them to start thinking about it, because there was some reporting that I have to, some inconsistencies, but with across so many different grantees submitting, there's gonna be, and so that's where it's our job, and we need to staff up in order to really, like, we looked at the data, but we need a couple dedicated staff to really look at it deeply and provide that TA. So we're partnering with Judicial Council. They have some dedicated staff to do that, and hopefully with some of our new hires, we can ramp up that work. And Jim has been helping us because the economic impact piece. So we asked programs to submit Maine and economic benefits. So how much do they help a client save or avert? And that number seemed like it was misreported a little bit. So Jim is taking a closer look with us to see whether we tweak that question or. I don't know. We're just trying to figure that out. It was a low number. It was surprising to us.
Claire has her hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Claire.
I believe she needs to be unmuted. Oh, there you go.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So one of the things our foundation does is we pay for social return on investment reports for grantees. And what's interesting is there are a few organizations like Open Door Legal that have figured out their own methodology, but the vast majority are using an entity that's based in Arizona called Community Service Analysis. And one suggestion I have is if the state bar really wants to see uniformity, what about creating an arm that could do these SROIs?
Yeah, and that's been something that, like, when Stephanie was here and with the reboot committee, we had talked about, and it seemed like we went towards the the program outcomes, but that I think that's something that we can invest in. Another thought that some programs have suggested is like maybe doing a sampling. Instead of having all programs submit evaluations, but what I said was, we really need the individual programs. And if we were to do like an SRO study of social return on investment, that would be a supplement to the program data, not in lieu of it. And so I think we're considering kind of everything.
This, what we're talking about, I'm obviously a big proponent of it. I also want to, just as devil's advocate, there's a caveat to everything, that we really want to make sure that the programs don't feel as though that what they're doing can't be substantiated and within the rubric, right? That may exist. And so therefore what they're doing is not important or is not actually making an impact. So finding that happy medium, and that came to mind because of what Claire just said, that there's one program that's kind of created their own version, and then there may be others that haven't. But so if there's a way in which we could balance, there's a formula and really allowing the programs to try to communicate their impact as well, right? You know what I mean? That there really is if there is a way in which to create a subcommittee on this and have LAC and Judicial Council ourselves a part of that, those dialogues, I think it would be the right time as we're going into potentially September with the new commission.
No, definitely. I think that's a good idea. And Selena, we had talked about it with like Donna and Bonnie, because the EF is just really a matter of time where we're going to be asked for the data. So we want to be preemptive and just have it once whoever asks. And so we have it, we need to analyze it, and then we need to issue it in some type of report that will tell a compelling story. We've done it before. I don't know if you recall, we issued an impact report a few years ago, but I think we might not have the bandwidth to do it every year, but we can certainly update the numbers every year. So there's at least like, a 1 or 2 pager that we know across all organizations, this is what we've achieved at kind of the high water, summary. We might not can issue like a 50-page report, but I think we can at least do the high level numbers.
And, it also, we did this when Stephanie was here. If you remember, Selena and Kim and Rich, actually Dan as well. Do you remember when we were trying to get more funds in from lawyers, from attorneys? And one of the campaigns was tell the story. let's start telling the story of what the
Oh, that must have
program.
been before my time. I don't remember that at all.
Yeah,
I
it was
think
before, it was
yeah.
before your time.
Kelly,
Yeah, and so, but it really was effective, you know,
Mhm.
having the programs tell the story of the impact they had with their clients
Mhm.
and to get attention, right? To get the, so this too is part of that, right?
Mhm.
It's another way to tell the stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I recall, part of that was that, you know, some people are really swayed by numbers and they are really swayed by the ROIs or any of that
Yeah.
data. But some people, the numbers are so big and so vast, it's hard to wrap your head around. And so telling a
Mhm.
client story is the piece that kind of marries the data. So I think Kelly Evans was still around when we were talking about the kind of
Mm.
storytelling piece.
Mhm.
That's right.
But it doesn't really go away. And I know that the Access Commission is now working with Voices for Civil Justice to launch a California kind of initiative to help us be better at telling these stories, come up
Mhm.
with a more common vocabulary and a more effective vocabulary. So I think that there's a nice kind of coincidence here of interest. There are people who want to tell stories better, and we have better stories to tell.
Yeah, and I have to say, you know, our the way our reporting evaluations, like they're really geared towards direct services work in our QSP, that our support centers have felt left out because it's just very hard to evaluate impact work, especially when that work drags on for 2, 3, 5, sometimes 10 years to tell, to be easily to tell. I think that work is just as compelling and sometimes maybe even more so, but it's been hard to capture data on that and then be able to tell it easily. So I know that has been really neglected, and we have promised the community for a couple of years that at some point we return to that and try to design something better. Oh, Kim, you're on mute.
So on that subject with the support centers, I mean, I think it would be worth the time for some of us to meet with some of the support centers and talk to them about that specifically. Yes, because we do know, Dwan, that they have felt left out
Yeah.
with RFPs.
Yeah, they have. I mean,
So-
even with the HP money, I mean,
Yep.
there
Oh,
was
yeah.
an iteration that was only going to go to direct services, and the way the RFP is, and it's not our fault, but this is the way the intent of the money is
Right.
really the direct services work, so they have
Right.
felt left out.
I mean, I just think that the support center stories are very compelling in terms of volume of impact on a systemic problem.
But it's getting that
they do
volume, Kim, that's hard. The number, it's getting like a number that we feel that we can stand behind, because the numbers that they provide in their evaluation, not that it's not true, but we don't know how to, they don't know how to, they give us an estimate, but it's not really based on anything. We need to be able to have some system for them to capture that, you know, whenever they do a handbook or they do political a policy advocacy, because they give the number, it's very large, and we don't doubt it, but we need to be able to justify it.
So on that, I think it'd be interesting to reach out to Gary Blasey.
Mm.
You know, he's really a great mind on those very voluminous cases. He might have some thoughts on how to capture that and package it.
Great.
Oh, Rich has his hand.
Rich has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to draw some distinctions. The evaluations serve a lot of different purposes. When we first started talking about that, I was concerned that we justified to the legislature their having been gracious in granting the legal service providers with the taxpayers' money. And I think we have a responsibility to ask the grant recipients to report to us so that we then in turn can justify to any legislator or liaison the use of taxpayers' money. But we also want to appeal to those who are generous to this cause by telling a story. The numbers may not mean as much. We also have in mind, I think through the evaluations, making sure that grant recipients are actually using the money for which it was intended, or at least for which we thought it was intended. So I think the kind of evaluation, and if we were to make any presentations to legal service providers or QSCs on this, we ought to be clear as to what we want to accomplish with the evaluations. It's not just one goal at all. It's a much broader goal, and it may not be easy to prepare one evaluation that satisfies all of those needs.
But the numbers that we've been providing and those statistics so far, Selena, they've been pretty good, right? That's the type of information that has been useful to the legislature, at least from when I've talked to them, they seem receptive to what we've been providing.
I think so too. I think that more data is better, but I don't think that, I can't recall any time where they've said that we don't have what they're looking for.
Yeah, I can't recall either. I mean, I think that's why the next level is the demographics data, in terms of like reporting out from district across race, ethnicity, age, you know, all that good stuff, demographics, because I think then we can appeal to certain legislators or certain other stakeholders, because then we have more specific data. But
the one kind of related piece to that is I think that not necessarily legislators, but other government folks have asked for outcome data that it's much, you know, farther down the line. And I know Lauren had to do a fair amount of advocacy with the governor's Department of Business and Economic Development when they were issuing some grants to legal aid organizations. They wanted to know what was happening 6 months or a year later. Because they were thinking like a doctor's office, you would check in.
Yeah,
and to educate them, and once they realized that people don't go back to a legal aid attorney 3 years later.
And you know, we had engaged with like a private evaluator a couple of years ago to see like how costly that was, and it's very exorbitant. I mean, we hear that's like the gold standards to obviously literally track the client outcome 6 months, a year, 2 years from now. So a program did have a suggestion of maybe we take a couple like low-hanging fruit in terms of issue areas and do a test for that, and maybe it's evictions for some narrow, the state bar invest and track that, and then maybe they can apply. So I mean, there are some creative ideas. We won't be able to do everything, but maybe something like that now that we have more housing money or partnership. I don't know, but I think there's opportunity now with funding that we can finally consider that.
And Bonnie would know a lot more about that because we had to hire evaluators for the Shriver projects.
Yeah.
And they had to do, you know, a control group and the
Yeah.
test group, and they had to find out what happened to people after the fact. So
Yeah.
I remember, I think they offered like incentives, like gift cards, if people would answer questions.
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
that.
And with the Shriver project, I mean, Bonnie invested, I think it was like $1 million or $750,000 for the Shriver evaluation. So they really invested, and so that's kind of the gold standard right now. I don't think we have that, but you know, we could probably do some piece of it.
Regardless of investment, I think ultimately the goal is for programs to understand the value and advantage of doing this themselves and taking advantage of their opportunities, which may not be very much more difficult than what they're already doing. I mean, it shouldn't feel like a burden necessarily if they get to learn something really interesting. And if they can tell us, hey, we found out that if you do this, it doesn't work. That's great news. We all want to know that. So, you know, reporting that kind of information is extremely valuable. Helping them understand why they're doing it and how to get the most out of it, I think is just as important as giving them money to do it, because otherwise they'll stop as soon as you stop paying them.
And I think programs see the value of it. And I think now it's just a resource, right? Because the bigger programs have invested in it and having an in-house evaluator. The smallest programs want to do it, but they're just struggling to figure out how.
You know, I've talked to so many programs this year that were starting new projects, partnership projects or otherwise. And I asked, how are you going to evaluate it? And the idea never occurred to them. And I mentioned them, you know, have you thought about talking to the clerk's office and seeing what the current volume is and seeing what happens after that? Like, oh my goodness, what a great idea. You know, that's a phone call. These little pieces just need to get into people's heads. And I think that if we just light a fire, they'll be much more creative than we are. And we'll find places to get useful data and build stronger programs among themselves. I hope so anyway.
Yeah, good thoughts, Dan. Well, this is quite a robust discussion. It's great. Any other thoughts about that, or any other priorities that people want to mention? We thought that was going to be a 10-second agenda item, right? Okay, well, I think we've come to the end of our agenda, unless anybody has anything further. And so with that, Bob isn't here, so we can't do his famous motion to adjourn. So we'll just.
But I will, and I'm very happy that we are at least a half an hour earlier, given that it's 10:30 my time.
I'm
here.
so sorry, Bonachet.
Don't
Yeah.
be sorry. This was a good conversation. So I move to adjourn.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.